Ladies and gentlemen, Brad Garlinghouse was at DC FinTech Week. He was interviewed and asked all kinds of questions. I have the entire interview here. It's about 20 minutes long. We're going to go through it because there's so many good things in this interview. He's going to talk about the case with the SEC, ETHgate a bit. He's going to get into a little bit about the presidents and what he feels about that. He's talking about hiring, US banks using XRP. There's so much here. Let's go ahead and play this. We'll go through it. I'll give you the commentary when it's needed, but let's go ahead and play this.
Welcome to another very short trip in Washington.
Feel those good vibes? Let's get these good vibes going.
It's always good to be back in Washington.
You gonna have to spend any time at the SEC while you're here this time?
Maybe a photo op? No planned visits to the SEC, but I would welcome that. Honestly, I think an open dialogue between industry and the SEC would be a step forward where we are.
Thank you.
Of course, what we're all referring to, and I think everyone in this room pretty much knows what I'm talking about, is the SEC case, which a judge ruled in your favor.
Do tell.
On XRP and whether or not it was improperly issued as a security. Are we calling that done and dusted, or are you bracing yourself for some kind of remedy or appeal process?
Please no.
Look, I think the SEC clearly lost on everything that matters. There is a remedy process which continues forward. There's the unknown, and I know Cher Gensler is on stage later. You should ask him if they're going to appeal.
Yeah.
That would be great. Look, that's not a knowable thing. From my point of view, they lost on things they care most about. But by the same token, if they move the appellate ladder, it becomes more amplified as a decision of consequence. And so it'll be interesting. I think there's a strategic trade-off.
So what he's saying there is if Gary Gensler appeals and goes to higher courts and loses, it could be catastrophic for not just his career, but for the SEC. That's what he said there. I speak Brad Garlinghouse.
I'm sure there's way more lawyers in this room than I'm comfortable. You guys know more about it than I do, but I think it's to be determined whether I choose to appeal. I think regardless of whether they appeal, I feel really good about it. I think it's very clear the SEC now they lost 3 times with Ripple. They lost, I know the CEO Grayscale is on, they lost the Grayscale case. But these are federal judges saying things, I'll quote Grayscale. The judge said that the SEC was being arbitrary and capricious.
They love saying this part.
This is damning language from a federal judge. I also have to believe, as long as I'm on a roll here, at some point when you have you keep trying to do the same thing and you keep having the same outcome, at some point you change your approach. I hope it would be magical if Cher Gensler got up here and said, hey, we're going to change our approach. We have lost time and time again, so let's step back. Apparently we haven't had it right because the judicial branch is saying we keep getting it wrong. And it would be great to have that constructive dialogue. Yep. I would be happy to go to the SEC today.
Okay.
Actually, today would be tough, but
yeah, I know
he's going to Dubai.
To get on a flight to Dubai in a couple of hours.
Swell, baby.
We'll pass the message along to Cher Gensler when he arrives.
I would come back from Dubai here to meet with Cher Gensler.
Okay.
All right.
On the record, he says that. So you mentioned.
So it feels like that they haven't quite resolved everything in the background, right? They're still trying to figure out a number on which they can settle on. It still doesn't feel like they've done that, right? Because he's saying that he'll come back and talk to Cher Gensler. If they already settled, he wouldn't need to speak to the guy, right? Just my 2 cents, babe.
That there was a win in the Ripple case and in the Grayscale case, or a loss on the other hand for the SEC. But of course, those aren't the only high-profile cases the SEC is currently pursuing. They've brought cases against Binance, against Coinbase.
That'll stick probably, the Binance one.
Does teach us anything about what might happen in those cases? How do you view the debate around XRP in the context of those cases?
I've followed the Coinbase case a little more closely, and so maybe I can comment there a little bit more. I think that the challenge has been, and again, even if you read or listen to what the judge has said in some of the early Coinbase procedural stuff, the SEC is not trending well there. And again, at some point you would think if you keep getting losses, you would say, okay, wait a minute, let's step back, let's reevaluate. Or even better,
not this guy.
Let's be part of championing a legislative solution. Let's not go to Congress and testify and say, the laws are clear. The laws clearly could be much clearer at a minimum.
Yep.
And I think what we're seeing in the Coinbase case, the world is not just a simple Howey test. And we have seen some momentum around legislative solutions. Obviously, Washington, it's hard to get things passed in Washington.
There's been 200 crypto bills since the last several years that have been put together, but nothing has ever passed the House nor the Senate or reached the president's desk. Just to give you some context. A lot of legislation, but nothing stuck.
In some ways that's a good thing, in some ways that's bad, but I'm hopeful that in 2024 we do see some legislative momentum that actually does provide that clarity. And it would be a magical thing if the SEC were part of that, working constructively with the industry to find that right path.
You say you're hopeful that something happens legislatively, but ultimately the way things are going right now, do you think more clarity is likely to come from Congress, or is it just going to continue to come from the courts and the judicial branch?
I think that's a question for Cher Gensler. Right now, he has taken an approach of your regulation through enforcement. That is not in my judgment, constructive way to regulate. One of the things that is most frustrating about this, Ripple spent well over $150 million defending that case. There is no recourse. So, the case was brought by Bill Hinman and Jay Clayton. Bill Hinman and Jay Clayton. Jay Clayton left office the next day.
Right.
It just feels a little bit like this wasn't, there's just no recourse to the SEC. There's no.
So what he's saying here, guys, is that Bill Hinman pushed this lawsuit after he got $15 million from the Ethereum Foundation, right? It went to Simpson Thacher. Simpson Thacher gave him the $15 million. He basically give Ethereum a free pass, went against everything the SEC was saying in the background, right? Then pushed the lawsuit against Ripple. And Ripple is saying that there's no recourse against the SEC for bringing this bullshit lawsuit. That's what he's saying here, right? And there should be something, right? They spent $150 million. That's money that they shouldn't have had to spend if this shenanigans never happened.
Negative outcome for anyone. And I think it's really confusing to me when Bill Hinman got up to the world in 2018 and said, ETH is not a security.
Yep.
And now we know from the litigation with Ripple that the SEC's general counsel even said, this is going to make things less clear. This isn't following the Howey test.
$15 million makes shit clear.
It feels a little bit, and I think there should be some call to accountability and even investigative work. Like, why would we take an approach of putting Ripple on the defense if we got to spend $150 million to show that the law actually doesn't say what they're saying, and then in another case say, okay, we think this one's clear. The government should not be picking winners and losers.
Well, government's taking bribes, man. Let's be honest here.
You think if there is an appeal in your case or in one of the other cases we've talked about, that ultimately this ends up with the Supreme Court that goes all the way to the top?
No.
I think that definitely could happen.
I don't think
so. We've said this publicly. We are in it till the end.
So you'd take it to SCOTUS?
They would take it to SCOTUS, but the SEC won't ever take this further. The reason why is because they'll put Bill Hinman on the stand and they'll ask him all these questions around ETHgate, and it'll be an even bigger problem for the SEC because there's probably, I'm not an attorney, but there's probably laws that were broken. Bill Hinman is a shady character, let's be honest with you. So I don't think this is ever going to go further, but they're willing to fight all the way to the Supreme Court. And I hope it actually happens because then they could put Bill Hinman on the stand. Yes, it would take a couple more years, but we're going to be here a couple more years anyways, waiting for central bank digital currencies. We got the time.
100%. By the way, again, there's a lot of lawyers in this room. That is a good thing. But the current Supreme Court, we'd love to see the Vegas odds on how that would go.
Yeah.
They haven't been super friendly to regulators. I think
Not like you're those regulators.
I love Brad.
And that
This guy's
goes
so
back to our
cool.
other point. I don't know if the SEC will choose to appeal this decision. If they do, I think it risks to them amplifying something that they're not yet saying. I think it'd be more constructive for the SEC and even the industry just to say, look, okay, let's step back, let's reevaluate. As I'm going from here to Dubai, other regulators around the world, like we have been in this dialogue. I've been talking to other regulators around the world for years, and there's an open dialogue, there's a constructive dialogue. The U.S. used to be looked at as a leader from securities regulation and protecting consumers. I think it's become a political liability. The way the SEC has approached this in the United States, we are looked at here in the U.S. relative to other countries as stuck. We are not leading. And even worse, it's just like the other countries are absolutely leading. The UK, I happen to be going to the UAE later today. But I could name 5 or 6 countries, Japan, even Australia, Switzerland, Singapore. These are all countries that are leading. And by virtue of that, you're seeing capital investment, you're seeing entrepreneurs set up shop in those countries because the rules are clear.
I want to come back to that rest of the world versus the U.S. point, but just to clarify something quickly, because you just said you'll take it to the Supreme Court if you have to. You will ride this out, fight it in the court until it is done if the SEC appeals. There's no chance that you would end up settling in some way.
That's a slightly different question. We've talked a little bit about this publicly now. I was offered the ability to settle prior to, they didn't just sue Ripple, they sued me.
Yes.
And they sued
dropped
Larson.
that now.
That has all dropped with prejudice. And like, that feels really good. Asterisk. It feels like, how did we end up here? Like,
Yeah.
you sued me as if it was clear I had to knowingly know that XRP was a security and act recklessly to not know. And people here in the law know more about this than I do, but there was no chance they were going to win that. And
Who's a more of a shady character, Brad Garlinghouse or Joseph Lubin with Ethereum? Let's be honest here. Joseph Lubin, shady as they come. Brad Garlinghouse, he's the white knight out here. All right, I'm a Brad fan all the way.
pushing it the way they did, it just feels the SEC should be part of the solution. Other countries, it's no problem. And you joke, I think you were joking in my meeting with the SEC today. In another country, that wouldn't. I've met with central banks. I've met with, you name the regulator, and it's, yeah, no problem. In an open meeting, open dialogue, we talk about what Ripple's doing. We talk about our view on the crypto industry. No problem. Here in the U.S., it's the laws are clear, but yet we can't answer, is ETH a security?
Yeah, that's something that the chairman has still not actually expressed an opinion on.
Today, but you ask him again today.
Yeah, ask him. I'll play that. If she does, I'll play that. Trust me.
Let's go back to the U.S., the rest of the world topic, as you were just discussing it there. Where do you think the best example is being set? What should the U.S. be trying to replicate? Or does the U.S. just need to be doing something different, but taking that regulatory approach differently?
I partly because they're a close economic and political partner to the U.S. The United Kingdom, the UK, I think, has been very constructive.
Big shout out.
And that when I say that, they're not. Again, Cher Gensler likes to talk about crypto as the Wild West. It is absolutely not the Wild West. Ripple is a regulated company in many jurisdictions around the world. Again, in Singapore, we have our license from MAS as a major payments provider. In the UK, we have, in Dubai, we've applied for the virtual asset regulatory, I can't remember the
VASP.
for.
In Dubai, it's virtual asset service provider. It's a VASP. That's what he's talking about there. Just give you some context, okay? Also, Christmas is coming up. I got a P merch down in the description. Crypto Lids. Check us out, guys. There's really cool stuff down there. I love my stuff.
Wild West, and I think it's a narrative.
This is the person that recorded the clip. Yeah. They're having some internet connection.
Promote a political agenda as opposed to sound policy. And I think there's still time for the U.S. to remain a key leader in this space. And some of the most important crypto companies in the world are based here in the United States. But if Brian Armstrong were up here today, I think he would say as well. Does he wish he had gone public in a different jurisdiction in the United States? The SEC approved his S1, but then sued him for doing things they knew he was doing. How does that make sense?
Okay, so you just said you think there is still time for the U.S. to be a leader. How much time is still time?
Yeah.
Where in the hourglass are we?
Like, I want to be realistic about this. The United States is, 23% of global GDP. If the U.S. gets its act together years from now, it's such an important economic actor that it feels like that option always exists because of where the U.S. stands in a global GDP.
So Brad just told you his timeline in his head, right? He's still this is the guy who's in all these meetings and all these rooms. This is still years away. So what does that kind of tell me? It tells me that we're still going to be in the speculation market for quite some time, and that taking profits is not a bad thing, especially when we get into this bull cycle. I'm going to be taking profits on a lot of different things. Hopefully the things will dip down and I'll buy back in at much cheaper prices.
Point of view. And it is really the finance capital of the world. But there are other finance capitals of the world. And certainly Dubai is trying to emerge even more so. Singapore for sure, London for sure. And not surprisingly, I've said publicly, 80% of Ripple's hiring this year will be outside the United States. And it's partly, why would I want to hire more and more people in the United States when the U.S. is making it hostile for me to operate here? And even with the SEC case,
shots are fired on this stage.
Customers.
Here you go.
Talk to them post the SEC case, and I say, okay, so great, now we have a product called on-demand liquidity, which uses XRP. And so I'll go to those banks and say, should we engage on that topic? And they're like, look, even though you won the case, the United States government is still hostile towards crypto. The OCC is hostile towards crypto. And until that changes, the banks in the United States are not going to engage meaningfully. I don't think the window has passed for the U.S. to be a leader, but I think every day that goes by, these other markets, that they want the entrepreneurs there. They want growth. And again, I'm mentioning Singapore, London, Dubai as three key examples, but the Ripple's London office is our second largest office.
That's a really good point. And to your point of you're hiring a lot internationally, these are long-term decisions you're making. These are long-term investments. So even if things were to get friendlier in the U.S., would you all of a sudden shift back here? How are you thinking about
That's
the
a good
long
question.
dribble?
It's a great question.
Well, a majority of our employees are still US based. I think eventually, if you zoom out far enough, none of this stuff barely existed 10 or 12 years ago. So if you zoom out far enough, do I think 10 years from now the US is going to figure this out and have a constructive regulatory framework for crypto? 1,000%. Yeah, it's at 10 years. I give it about 5. I don't know where I would go as we rewind, but I remain a long-term optimist. I was in Silicon Valley for 25 years. I moved a couple of years ago. But better technologies almost always win in the end. And I truly believe blockchain technologies are a path to reducing friction for financial transactions to the benefit of many industries. And the irony, and you and I were talking about this backstage a little bit, for some reason, crypto has become a little bit of a partisan issue. When I first came to Washington, and as Chris said, I've been coming here 4 or 5 years, it was a totally bipartisan issue. And for some reason recently, it's come a little bit partisan towards Republicans being more open and constructive.
It's true.
Saying, okay, let's pass this legislation. The irony to me around that is one of the core benefits around crypto, particularly around payments, are customers who can least afford the cost of remittances are actually burdened the most. So I'm talking about immigrant populations sending millions, billions of dollars into other countries, and they're paying, the World Bank would say, 600 to 700 basis points. That's outrageous.
6-7% is what he's talking about there.
Again, so for me, it's surprising that it is not more bipartisan and that we would have seen kind of something pass already. But again, I think there's still hope, and I think now that we have a Speaker of the House, maybe we'll make progress.
Probably not.
Maybe. They have to, how to fund the government in the next 9 days. Well, so they have quite a lot that they're dealing with. But to your point, if it doesn't happen this Congress with this...
Probably won't, guys. I'll be honest with you. It's rough out here.
Passed a few bills out of committee, stablecoin legislation, a market structure bill as well. If they can't get it done before the next election, what does that mean?
I don't really know. What I mean by that is, I don't know that the presidential politics, I haven't heard either of or Trump really speak about this. I think Trump once tweeted about Bitcoin or something years ago.
With Truth Social it now.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry. But so I don't really have it.
Okay. My thought here is the when Trump was in office, they had the House, Senate, and the presidency. And they really didn't get a lot done. Okay? They got nothing done in the crypto industry. They got nothing done with infrastructure. They got some like VA stuff, which is for vets. That was a very positive thing. And then the C word happened, and you saw how bad that was in the United States and how that was handled. So I'm not too excited about either president right now, because I feel like either one is not going to help us move this forward. I think we need somebody younger that understands how important crypto is. And until we get that person, we might be waiting in the United States for a very long time, unless they absolutely have to pass this.
I view this as a bipartisan issue. It's good for the United States to have constructive engagement with next generational exponential technologies that truly can have dramatically positive impacts on our economy to the benefit of citizens. And the U.S., if you go back in the history books, the fact that the U.S. passed clear legislative solutions around the internet in the late 90s allowed massive amounts of capital and entrepreneurs. If you think about that, I think we're hosted by AWS here. The largest, most important internet companies are based in the United States. The geopolitical benefit to the United States, not just economic, has been massive because we created the right environment for entrepreneurs and capital to flow into a next generational technology framework. Blockchain is a next generational technology framework. It is going to touch many industries. I would agree with people who say right now there's too much speculation. I agree. We need more clear, constructive uses of these technologies to solve industry problems. But you're seeing more and more companies doing that, and you're seeing more and more traction. The United States should get behind that. We want these technologies to emanate here. We want to have that. And for whatever reasons, I think the SEC is part of the problem there.
Yeah. Elizabeth Warren?
Well, you hear and you talk about how this is becoming somewhat of a partisan issue. I've spoken with a lot of Democratic lawmakers, crypto skeptics about this, and they cite fraud often. A lot of people are defrauded through crypto scams. Also questioning whether or not blockchain ultimately really does anything new that can't be done already, that it's just trying to recreate something for no good reason and potentially bad things come with it. How much more work needs to be done to push back against
US dollar, everything bad comes with that, right?
The fraud point, and again, you and I talked a little about this backstage. The FTX fraud wasn't a crypto fraud. Yes, it was a fraud. I don't know. It absolutely wasn't unique that this happened to crypto. There's other frauds that in some cases were even at a bigger scale than what happened there. So when I hear people say we need legislative solutions around to prevent FTX, maybe if Gary Gensler and the SEC weren't so focused on going after Ripple and meeting openly with Sam Bankman-Fried, maybe we could have actually avoided some of that. I don't know. Gensler won't comment on his meetings he had with SBF, so I don't really know what that's all about.
Brad is just snipe shotting
against me. Those aren't the laws we need to clarify. Fraud laws
drop so many bombs.
Many jurisdictions. You have Chair CFTC. There's fraud. There's lots of ways you can address that. And obviously, Sam Bankman-Fried, I think, is probably going to go to jail. I know the sentencing hasn't happened.
Yeah, but guilty on all 7 counts.
Correct. I don't think that's the core of the problem. I think, but the other part of your problem, people who say there's not enough real utility, I agree with that. There's a lot of excitement, and there should be. But that also was true in the earliest days of the internet. There's a birth, an explosion of entrepreneurial activity that did result in the dot-com bust. But then you still have emerged from that Google and Amazon and Facebook. There's no doubt in my mind these technologies, because they actually can be used to rewire how transactions happen. There's immense friction in how cross-border payments happen, where Ripple's focused. But there's immense friction in real estate, in bond settlement. There's ways to use these technologies. But I use those examples. Those aren't things Ripple's doing, but just it's more advocating for the industry at large.
Let's talk about Ripple, though, and the utility there. What's institutional adoption looking like?
Inside the United States, it's been great. I mean, look,
I'm sensing a theme here.
It was a dark time when Ripple got sued.
It's the video. Haven't hit like button? Please do. Help me get in front of more people.
We didn't know it was going to happen. Outside of the United States, regulators were like, we don't understand what the SEC is doing, and we continued to 2021 and 2022 were some of our best years ever. And the primary measure we use to measure growth
is the video.
Tens of millions to hundreds of millions to billions of dollars of transactions at a time when we're in the middle of this massive lawsuit with the SEC. Other countries, again, have engaged. They see how these technologies can be used to improve payment flows. They see how cross-border settlement works today. It's slow. It's expensive. Actually, the head of the Italian central bank, I'm forgetting his name right now, he just wrote an opinion piece in the Financial Times about how broken cross-border payments are.
True.
It's 23, and these are technologies that actually the U.S. is trying to stymie. It doesn't make sense.
So I know you always would rather focus on XRP utility rather than speculation, but do you have a thought on, I believe it's been bid up 30% in the last month?
Crypto overall has been up. It hit a low of, I think, 16 or 17,000. Now it's, I think, at 35,000. XRP definitely has been on a rally. Look, if I had a magical window into what drives crypto prices, I probably would quit this job and just go.
Enjoying Cryptonairz.
Long view. The big picture around these technologies, I'm very much a multi-chain viewpoint. Yes, XRP is extremely good at some use cases, and payments is clearly one. But I think there are lots of other blockchains that can be used for other purposes. That it's not going to be one winner to take it all.
I'm already bracing myself for when I go check Twitter after this to see everything the XRP army had to say about this conversation.
That's you.
Passionate advocate group.
That is you.
I see that, yes.
I think that is a good thing. There's obviously a very passionate advocate group around Bitcoin. I will say, and I say this to anyone who will listen, the ideologues and the kind of the maximalism that happens in crypto, I think, is counterproductive to crypto. And when I see people advocating that it's all Bitcoin or it's all XRP or something, I'm just like, no, it's not. And I think we all have to come together. And frankly, one of the silver linings of the Ripple case with the SEC has been the industry realizing, like, this was important for the industry. Yes, it was great for Ripple, and frankly, it was nice for Brad Garlinghouse to have the case dropped. But it's important for the industry, and the grayscale decision, I think it's incredibly important for the whole industry to come together and agree on things here in Washington to catalyze that legislative solution that we haven't yet seen.
Have to leave it on that note. Brad Garlinghouse, the CEO.
Thank you guys for being here. I hope you enjoyed the video. I will see you next time. And hey, what do you think about this interview? Were you shocked at anything that Brad said? I mean, a few takeaways from me is that, it feels like we are still years away from this, right? And that's how he sees this. The US has a lot of issues. The SEC has a lot of issues. They need to fix that. The government has a lot of issues. And until we can get all this figured out, crypto really isn't going to go anywhere in the United States. And companies are not going to be hiring in the United States. And so I'll leave that with you guys. You know, I know this was a longer video, but hey, this was a great, she asked really great questions compared to the last interview that we saw with Brad. That lady was terrible. This one, she knocked it out of the park. Big shout out to her. I don't know what her name is, but she's a rock star, and she did a really good job asking the right questions and got Brad just kind of comfortable and talking with everything that we want to hear. Right on. So guys, really quickly, Token Metrics is going to have a Black Friday sale. There's a link down in the description. Take advantage. I think it's like 20 to 30% off. Also, there's the store where you can get Cryptonairz, you can get XRP, you can get XDC, XLM, Bitcoin, Ethereum. There's different types of gear you can get, some mugs, shirts, sweatshirts, beanies, whatever it is that you want. We have it down in the store. We really appreciate you watching. I really appreciate you watching. I love you, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much.